afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted that so many of you are here. I mean, over the last weekend, was sort of this Thanksgiving, and like everybody else, I kind of reflected on the number of things that I have to be thankful for. And one of them is to be a member of this profession. This is a profession where people enjoy learning, enjoy research, enjoy sharing their art and their wisdom. And I'm glad to be associated with the Humanities Center that provides a venue for scholars to come and share their art. You know, and we do that not because of any reward or anything else, because I'm always in awe every year, year after year, between 40 and 50 people, faculty sign up for these talks. They don't get paid. All they get out of it is the opportunity to share their research and their art and get feedback from their colleagues, all as part of this wonderful vocation for learning and teaching and sharing. And today we have three scholars doing the same thing. One is Shooshan Danagoulian. I might have mispronounced her name. Is an assistant professor in the Department of Economics, specializing in health economics. She also worked collaboratively with Dr. Philip Levy and his team of integrative bioscience, at his team in the iBio Center, bringing economic expertise to public health and clinical projects. Nationally, she moderates the Electronic Health Economics Colloquium, which began in April 2020 in response to the isolation in her field imposed by the COVID mitigation measures. She is the site principal investigator for the COVID-19 student survey, which you will hear about in this presentation. Alan Goodman, my good friend, I've known for many years, and we go back. I look forward to his short, pithy, wise cracks as we pass each other along the walkway. He is a professor of economics at Wayne State University, director of graduate studies in that program. He is absolutely well published. These are all very, very productive scholars, and for that reason, I'm not reading their professional bios, because that would take up all the time we have for the talk. I'll just let you know that he received his A.B. from the University of Michigan, so he's a real Wolverine, and his PhD from Yale University. He specializes in health economics and housing economics, and he has published over 80 articles and 4 books. And then we have Professor Janet Hankin, who has been a dear, dear friend of the Humanities Center. And I think of people that we have worked well with over the years and who have been practical friends. I mean, things like attending our Brungback talks, always volunteering for participating in our conferences and assigning her students to come to our Brungback talks, and always being a friendly presence along the corridor as well. I asked her about her daughter all the time, and I see how, just as how I have a favorite daughter, she bursts into smiles when she talks about her daughter, and I tell her about mine. And she is a sociologist, of course, and she specializes in the sociology of health and illness. She received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin, and has published 22 articles and chapters on psychological distress that were funded by the National Institute for Mental Health. And these three outstanding scholars will be sharing with you their research on coping with COVID-19 preliminary results from student survey. So let us welcome them to the virtual podium. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be presenting the information, and I'm going to pause. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, and Shooshan will read them aloud, and we will answer them for you. I'm grateful so many of you came, and we're delighted to be here today. So I'm going to start my share screen. So we're talking about the psychosocial impact of COVID-19 on Wayne State students. And what I'm going to do is to optimize the screen share so you can see the slides better. So you'll hear me, but you won't see me right now. We're going to talk about the survey itself, research questions, methods, the sample characteristics, the results, the conclusions, and our policy implications. As a background, the COVID-19 student survey measures the challenges that are faced by students through the pandemic and its mitigation measures. Students faced a massive movement to online instruction last spring, as well as uncertainties in the labor market. And as you know, many of our students are working, and so this had a real impact on them. Universities were concerned that their students might not return for fall 2020. As of late August 2020, more than 37 universities in 10 different countries agreed to field this survey, and it's been translated into Spanish, Swedish, German, and Italian, with over 55,866 responses. Every effort has been made to keep the questions as consistent as possible across the countries, while also respecting the different institutional and ethno-cultural contexts in which the survey is being fielded. The survey would not have been possible without the cooperation of the university administration. Shooshan received a request that Wayne State participate. We took the request to Provost Whitfield, who is very enthusiastic and who marshaled a cadre of people to help us, including Dr. Brockmeyer's office, the Dean of Students' office, CNIT, and everybody else who could help us launch the survey and encourage students to participate. So it was launched and opened on May 27th, and it closed on June 22nd. We sent the survey to 16,292 undergraduate students who were enrolled in winter 2020. We had 2,400 respondents. The response rate was 14.7%. It was one of the largest response rates of any of the universities in the studies. The administration helped publicize the survey. Dr. Whitfield put out a message to all students. We also had frequent reminders from the Dean of Students' office, and that was extremely helpful. And we couldn't have done it with without everybody in the administration who had offered their services to get this survey launched and off the ground. And also, President Wilson mentioned the survey significantly in one of his YouTube talks. And the response rate went way up after people saw that YouTube. So we're very grateful to the president of the university as well. Let me just pause and ask if there are any questions so far, or anything in the chat.
We don't have anything in the chat. Jan, you can continue.
Okay, thanks. So some of the questions we asked were about sociodemographic characteristics, and I want to begin sharing the results with you on age, gender, race, Hispanic heritage, country of origin, first generation college student, and their parents' education. Almost 26% of the respondents were male, 72.43 were female, a small proportion identified as other. As far as the age distribution, as one might expect, 62% were 18 to 22. The next largest age group was 23 to 26, with 19.72%. 27 to 35-year-olds comprised 11.13%, and the 36 and over was about 7%. If you see on this table to the right, we have 27.27 who were juniors, 27.50 who were seniors. Freshmen were less likely to respond. Sophomores were more likely to respond. And some of the students were super seniors, so they were like in their 5th year. The sample characteristics in terms of race, which is in this top table, indicated that over 62% were white, a little over 14% were Black, small proportion were American Indian, 11.46 were Asian, 4 persons were Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders, and a little over 11% said they were other. In terms of Hispanics, 6.23% identified as Hispanics. And let me just move this up so you can see the bottom. 69.8% of the students' mothers had more than a high school diploma. 30.20 had a high school diploma or GED or less. For fathers, 64.68% had more than a high school diploma, and 35.32% had some high school or high school diploma or less. So that was a really interesting finding. For all the tables you're going to see, these findings relate to responses in May and June about their winter experiences. So you have to keep that in mind as I show you those figures. Are there any questions about the sociodemographic characteristics that people want to raise? They're pretty similar to the typical student at Wayne State, we've been told.
There are no questions in the chat box so far.
Okay, thank you. So we asked students what challenges they faced in completing their courses during winter term. And these were close-ended questions, so they could check any of these. More than 12% had insufficient computer or laptop access. Nearly 24% had insufficient access to high-speed internet. 35% were unable to use the library because it was closed and did not have sufficient resources for library work. Look at how many, 65.5%, had a lack of a quiet place to study. 63.4% had increased family responsibilities, and we'll be talking about this later because we added additional questions to look at this. 65% had lack of contact with other students. and 61.7% complained that they were challenged by a lack of enough contact with faculty through emails and other ways of communicating. We also asked the students, which of the statements apply to you right now? This again is in May and June. So 9.6% had experiences that were consistent with COVID-19. So they had a dry cough or fever or aches. A little under 2% had been positively diagnosed with COVID. 9.6% had an immediate family member, a parent, sibling, or partner who had been diagnosed with COVID. 2.7% lost an immediate family member from COVID, so parents, siblings, or a partner had died. And a whopping 48% said, I know someone outside my immediate family who has died from COVID-19. Some of these may have been people in the media, but that still is a significant amount of positive responses to that complaint. When we asked them which of these statements apply to you right now in May and June, 78% and a little bit more felt locked down, quarantined, staying at home, or sheltering in place. More than a third had lost a job. 0.9% had no health insurance. 34.5% said one or more of my immediate family members, again defined in the survey as parents, siblings, or partner, lost their job. And many of them were at high risk because 28.4% had an immediate family member who worked as a medical professional. This is an interesting question that we added to the international survey. We were very interested to find out how many people post-COVID were caregivers for a variety of categories of people. So you see at the top, most of the respondents did not have any caregiving responsibilities. The way this table is set up, people could have more than one responsibility for people in these age groups. We're going to be studying these combinations later. We've just kind of delved into the data and done some quick analyses to get out some basic percentages of and numbers of what people are doing we're doing in May and June. So 50 of them cared for infants under 1 year. 139 cared for children who were preschoolers. 149 cared for children 6 to 12, children 12 to 17. 196 of our students took care of them. These were probably siblings who needed help with school activities or being transported places. 262 of our students had caregiving responsibilities for people aged 18 to 64, and 201 cared for elderly people. So this was any time at all, and we're going to be analyzing the amount of hours that they spent on this activity, but it is a real significant burden on the students who are trying to finish up their winter term as well. Let me pause with this and ask if there are questions so far about any of the data.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box. However, if anyone wants to add questions as they go, I can answer them either in the chat or ask Dr. Hankin to answer them live.
Thank you. Now's the crux of our research. How has COVID-19 impacted psychosocial distress? You may recall that when we asked about other challenges reported, I noted that there were some open-ended questions. And there were 248 persons who wrote answers out of the 2,400 to other challenges that made it difficult for them to finish the winter term. And 47 of those persons noted that they had mental health problems that made it difficult for them to do their coursework in winter term. These problems that were listed were by and large depression and anxiety. The questionnaire we used from the international study asked 5 questions about how people were feeling, because preliminary research shows that there is a growing mental health burden of COVID-19 and its mitigation policies. So the 5 questions that were asked, and they were close-ended, so people could say, this does not apply to me, or up to it strongly applies to me. So they included, I am nervous when I think about current circumstances. I am calm and relaxed. That question was reverse coded in our analysis. So if they said they were calm and relaxed, they got a 1 for that question if they answered that applied to them all the time, that it strongly applied to them. Question 3 was, I am worried about my health. Question 4 is, I'm worried about the health of my family members. And question 5 is, I feel stressed about leaving my home. Now, it's very clear that these questions represent worries and anxieties. And as I said, there was not a direct question, unfortunately, in the study asking about depression, but from the open-ended answers, we know that existed as well. So we're focusing our analysis on this psychological distress, which we define using 5 Likert scale questions on the intensity of feelings of nervousness, anxiety, worry, and stress that range from 1, does not apply at all, to 5, strongly applies. And we aggregate these questions into a single index using confirmatory factor analysis, which is a statistical technique. And the scores range from 1 to 25. And it's 1 because not everybody answered every question, but somebody put 1 for one of the questions. The mean on this scale was 18.42, which is a very high level of psychological distress. I see that there seem to be some questions in the chat.
Yes, there are 3 questions, of which I'll start with the first 2. The first, coming from Dr. Spur, asks if, in a question that asks whether one or more of my family was affected by COVID, or whenever a question asks about one or more of my family, whether the respondent might interpret that to include oneself.
It was phrased so we first asked the question of them and then asked the question, if there anybody in your family who's had COVID or who has died from COVID. So it was a pretty clear differentiation the way it was phrased. So it excluded the respondent.
Similar question is asked about the definition of immediate family, whether the respondents really interpreted them to be individuals who live within the same household as them, or whether these were household contacts that may live outside of the household.
That isn't clear. I don't know, Shooshan, do we have anything? We have number in their households, right?
We do have, I think, information about number in their household, but I think the word immediate family was left to open interpretation, as is usually done in surveys. So I presume that it would have been interpreted as you know, and that's actually particularly important in a college setting. I can imagine that it was interpreted as the family that one belongs to rather than the household that one lives in. So if you live in a house with a few roommates, that's not the immediate family that one would be led to interpret in these questions.
And there was a lot of pre-testing of these questions when it started. And David Yeager was responsible for coordinating all of those things. And so I think they discovered that was the best way to ask the question. And they took a lot of questions from previous surveys. So I think it was pretty clear to the respondents who those people referred to.
Another question again from Noel: were the data weighed to better represent target population?
No, we haven't weighted them yet.
So these are data that are the result of a survey, and they're not representative. They're not populationally representative. Dr. Spur is asking, furthermore, whether what other universities were included in the survey. I can answer that question by, as mentioned, there were about 10 countries that that had universities that fielded the survey. In the United States, the survey was fielded at both private and public institutions. In Michigan, for example, Michigan State has fielded the survey. Wayne State has fielded the survey. Universities ranging from International University of Florida to Syracuse University, a whole range of public and private institutions in the United States, both liberal arts colleges as well as universities, R1 universities have conducted the survey. The universities were selected on the basis of invitation to participate and the ability or the willingness to receive administrative approval for the fielding of the survey. So these are all subject to essentially an administrative process and university interest and participation.
And I should note that we had a record short time in getting IRB approval, thanks to everybody's help. You know, it was really amazing. The Office of Research just jumped right in and got us approved so we could launch the survey as soon as possible. And we were awestruck by that.
Shirin asks to know more about the distress index. She is pointing out specifically that the question appears to be based on, or the index seems to be based on 5 questions, which we mentioned, which don't necessarily address depression. That is, these are not along the lines of a Kessler index or any other index of depression, and or are they? So, Jan, if you want to address that.
No, I mean, this is a survey that was used by the people who created the study, and it's called a worries index, and I can give you a reference to that. But no, it doesn't include depression. And basically, you know, we would have liked to have had that question in, but we could only do so much in terms of adding additional questions to the survey because they were limited in terms of what they could handle from additional questions. So we got to put 3 in, and we focused on caregiving.
And I want to also emphasize that some of these questions, for example, the caregiving question was fielded exclusively at Wayne State, but the anxiety and or the worry questions that we're using in this particular presentation were fielded across all of the surveys that were conducted in all the universities. So outside of the Wayne State experience, the questions about worry and depression or worry and anxiety can be compared across institutions as well. Another question from Noel Molinari asks, was the survey conducted in multiple waves? Jan, you want to take that or?
Well, every university launched its survey at a particular time. And when did they start? In May? Late April?
I think the study was approved, IRB approved in mid-April, and I think end of April was when the first of the universities launched their surveys.
But we did not do separate waves. We just kept nudging people to fill the survey out, thanks to the administrative support we got with high people saying, gee, if you haven't done this, please fill it out.
The survey was fielded over a 4-week period at Wayne State. I believe there is intent for a return survey to be conducted next year. I am not 100% sure of that, but I think there is a return survey or a second wave intended to be conducted a year later. However, among all the universities that participated, as Janet mentioned, the timing of participation was slightly different. It depended obviously on the ability of receiving approval when the university was approached. And so to this, even in this current time, there are universities that are fielding this survey continuously. So there is a, there's no what we would call a panel or longitudinal version of the survey. That is, we haven't at this point surveyed the same individuals twice, but there is a cross-sectional time, I guess, shift across universities as they're being surveyed, which means that some universities are responding to the early time period of COVID, and some are responding in the later, the mid and later time periods of COVID.
Shooshan, you may want to talk about who sponsored the research MBER.
The research, because of the fact that the research was conducted internationally, there was the need for a single institutional review board to approve the structure and the fielding and the appropriateness of the survey. Therefore, the survey applied and received institutional review approval from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is overseeing this entire study and providing approval for it.
Thank you. Any new questions to answer? Before I go
No
to the
other
regression?
questions.
Okay, so we ran a quick regression, and again, we're just beginning our analysis. So there will be more to come and more complicated models and different kinds of variables. But we did a regression to predict the distress score. And the significant predictors show that females were more distressed on the scale. If the student had a family member who lost a job, they were more distressed. And if they were caregiving for another member of their family during the COVID in May and June, they were more depressed. And so the R squared was about, what was it, Alan?
I think it goes 0.1.
No, it was, but yeah, it was about 0.1, but it was statistically significant. And in social science, we're not surprised by R squared that are that level. So what does this mean? Well, analyzing the factors contributing towards the index, we find that students who are female, whose family member had lost a job, and those who were caregivers showed higher levels of psychosocial distress based on those 5 questions. The policy implications suggest the continuing need to provide psychological support for Wayne State students during the pandemic. We need to understand students' caregiving responsibilities outside the university, and we need to understand students' financial responsibilities due to a family job loss. And while this was a one-shot picture of what was going on several months ago, we have a lot of anecdotal data from fall 2020 that suggests that these problems are persisting. I'm currently teaching almost 300 students, and the anxiety and the worry and the problems that some students are working 60 or more hours a week to make up for a job that their parent lost. You know, they're still having problems with computers. They're still having problems finding a safe, you know, quiet place to study and work on their classwork. And it's really true that responsibilities are making it very difficult for some of our students to excel in their coursework. So what I was going to do was to end the show and stop the screen sharing, and then invite people to answer questions, ask questions, and we will answer. And we really appreciate your interest. So don't be shy. You can unmute.
You can unmute. Let me note that the idea of the warp speed that we got this together was nothing short of amazing. In the fact we started this around May 4th. We discovered, which we did not know, that the university had a special COVID-19 committee that had to approve everything before it went anywhere else. So we had that. For those who don't know what NBER is, NBER is basically a research shop that I have never had the good luck to be plugged into very well. But they collect a lot of indirect costs from places like Harvard and MIT and Columbia and the like. And it provides a place for many researchers to do their work. But but what we got from them was a survey that we could not possibly have piloted, a survey where the questions had been vetted and the like. Another interesting thing in this kind of collaborative study is that we are somewhat limited in what we can share, in that the people who put this original study together don't want all of the component pieces to get together on their own and essentially, what's the word I'm looking for, and get stuff out faster than the original team did. So we have some constraints on what we're allowed to do. But again, when we first heard about it, I turned to Janet and I said, "What should we do?" She says, "Call Keith." And Provost Whitfield, who has since gone on to Nevada, was absolutely critical in helping us marshal some of the support that we got.
And Steve Lanier helped with getting us through the IRB. There were just lots of people who pitched in to make this happen, and it happened really quickly because we didn't want to lose the experiences that the students were having through the middle of May when the semester ended.
Yeah, because there were some universities where they were still in session in May. But with us, our students had finished the winter session. So we felt that every week or two that we were delayed, we would be losing the immediacy. We were very careful to make sure that they understood that we were talking about the winter 2020 term. Whenever these things have to be done, and I've sat on NIH review panels, and some of the hardest proposals to evaluate are ones that want to address something that's going on right now. And
it's hard to do. We also, if students didn't have a computer or weren't checking their Wayne State email, they didn't know about the survey. You know, we were not permitted by the IRB or the NBER to give any prizes or gift cards for people who participated. And so the fact that we got this high of a response rate is really amazing.
Noel points out that the 15% response rate was actually quite good. Indeed, it was. One of the interesting features was that, generally speaking, the surveys would receive higher response rate if the survey was fielded while the classes were still in session. Once the semester ended, the survey response rates were really very low. In our case, because of the fact that we received substantial administrative support, we were able to have university-wide announcements, university-wide emails that were sent repeatedly in order to push more students to respond. And the end result was that we managed to have a response rate which was, aside from the fact that we were administering the survey in the off season, in the off semester period, it received a very high response rate because of the administrative support. To this date, of course, there are a lot of universities that have participated with a larger student body, but the sample size that we received is among one of the largest sample sizes because our response rate was substantially larger than other university response rates.
Hi, I was wondering if I could, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sasha.
Oh, hi. My name is Sasha. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Public Health, and my research is actually on college student mental health. So for the last 6 years or so, I've been part of the Healthy Mind Study, which is another national mental health survey on college student mental health. And we also had a COVID-19 kind of module to our study. And I really appreciated that your study asked a lot of, socioeconomic related questions that we didn't get to in our survey. But I was wondering if you looked at substance abuse, and also from, it sounds like from like anecdotal data that there was already a pretty high level of psychosocial or psychological distress in fall of that year. And we found from Healthy Minds that, I mean, mental health issues have been increasing for the last decade pretty significantly. So I'm wondering how much of the distress you think is actually COVID related versus just kind of like existing mental health distress that the students had. I asked this because we found that in our data, and it sounds like we only looked at, I think, like 12 schools for COVID-19, but we found that we had like actual screens for depression and anxiety, and we found that the rates didn't really change that much, and actually substance abuse went down. So I was curious about what your thoughts were on that.
Well, if you look at an indicator, which is very anecdotal, but in my class, and between my two classes, I have filed more care reports with the dean to get the counseling and psychological services to get involved with my students because they are so distressed. I've never had that kind of experience since I started at Wayne State in 1986. There national data about substance abuse changes. There seem to be differing results. We didn't ask for substance abuse questions. What was interesting to me is that when the students were asked, are there any other challenges that you want to talk about? 47 of the 248 who wrote in answers raised mental health concerns. So those were directly attributed to the COVID, epidemic at that point in time.
I also want to add to what Jan said. The aim of this survey was primarily to find out how the labor market outcomes were changing for students who were caught in this kind of a COVID time period. That is, how they were making decisions about their future coursework, their future courses of study, their ability to have jobs after this period of time, any jobs that were, any employment contracts that were signed and then rescinded, any internships that were there that disappeared because of COVID. So the aim of the survey was primarily at finding out these kinds of educational and employment outcomes. What's interesting is, as you pointed out, mental health is an integral component of being able to engage in these educational, to make these educational decisions, as well as these employment outcomes. But, and so it was these questions about anxiety were fielded largely to gauge, to some extent, what are the health concerns that are occurring at the same time with these financial and economic conditions that are changing for students. But because of the fact that that was not the primary concern, we are getting kind of an overall summary of their health and mental health instead of focusing on it exclusively. But it would have been interesting to field both surveys simultaneously, if you ask me. That would have given us a lot more of an in-depth view on how willing people are to remain in school or look for a job when their mental health is being challenged.
Sasha, we're gonna have to meet you. We're gonna have to talk to you.
I'd be happy to. Yes, I would love that.
That's great.
Alicia Ortez points out that indeed in her experience, and Alicia is the undergraduate advisor at the Department of Economics, she points out that in the winter and fall 2020 semesters, she has received a lot more care reports than in other semesters. And so that is, anecdotally, I think we're all seeing this kind of surge in mental health and need for self-care that is occurring specifically because of COVID and not more, beyond the general upwards trend that we're seeing.
Let me also note, I am absolutely delighted that Noel Molinari has joined us. Noel is an outstanding statistician at CDC and the 2001 graduate of our PhD from our department. So Noel, thank you so much for joining us.
And she noted nationally there's been an increase in proportion of emergency department visits for substance abuse and domestic violence.
That is actually indeed the case. And not to pitch my own work, but I do have a paper which is currently under review with a couple of my colleagues on some of the things that could be explaining the rise in domestic violence. In particular, my research is looking at the role of alcohol access and consumption on the rise in domestic violence. And we find that indeed in the post-COVID period, the relationship between alcohol and domestic violence is substantially stronger than compared to before the COVID period.
Shooshan, that suggests. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sasha.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
I was wondering, do you think that is adults in general, though, and not specific to college students? I asked because I wonder if we were really puzzled by the substance abuse finding that we found, and I think it was just drinking that we asked, but I think because so many colleges had shut down in the March and there's like less social gatherings, we're wondering, that was kind of like our hypothesis on why we saw this trend. So I was curious about the kind of trends we see in the chat and in your work, if it was on adults in general.
My work was actually based on adults, and it was based on specifically on Detroit, not nationally, but Detroit specifically. And we based our study on domestic violence 911 calls. So a lot wider than just a specific population. It was aimed at capturing the incidence or the nearest metric of incidence of domestic violence, which are 911 calls. and we compared it to visits to liquor stores in a given neighborhood. So we kind of did a neighborhood by neighborhood comparison.
That makes me think if there's a second wave of the survey that we could launch, we really need to ask specific questions about depression.
That might be. I actually I don't know a lot about the second wave. I will ask David about that. I had just seen a brief note about it in our group correspondence, but I can inquire to see whether they're going to be filling the same survey or a follow-up survey. In which case, it would be interesting to find out more about depression. Indeed.
I'm curious. Do you guys have the ability through your IRB to link these results to administrative data on the students?
Unfortunately, no. And I have asked that question time and time again, Fabrice, because that would have been amazing. So the IRB does not allow the survey to be linked to anything else because it is a national IRB. So at Wayne State, we were essentially having to toe the line that NBER set for us. The university did offer to link it to student records, which would have given us substantial insight into how the students actually did academically. But unfortunately, we cannot pursue that avenue.
Gotcha.
The IRB would not let us do it. Wayne was willing to let us link, but we weren't allowed to do it.
Yeah.
But Janet,
I guess I guess that if you could do that, and possibly in a follow-up survey, you could do that if you got if you got different approvals for that follow-up survey. But at the same time as these immediate sort of personal family impacts are occurring, the labor market's changing. And so this was initially a labor market survey. I personally would be curious to see, if students' labor market decisions are changing. Are they switching majors at all as they sort of see how the economy is changing? And would any of that kind of decision making be affected by their personal circumstances?
Well, Fabrice, there are questions about labor market responses. We are we're trying to wade through some of those. It's an interesting thing in the sense that we can only look at our own data right now.
Mm-hmm.
The more general publications that will have a cast of thousands of authors, including the three of us, presumably we'll look at those in more detail. And to the extent that we can compare our students to larger groups or to the means, we may be able to do some inferences.
Yeah.
I think that what people really have to understand is that doing this was like catching lightning in a bottle, in the sense that all hell was breaking loose in March, April, and May, and we had the opportunity to jump onto a moving bus, and the response rate and the cooperation was and I will tell you that the central administration basically really kept their hands off any of the intellectual stuff.
We do have data on self-reported GPA.
Oh,
It looked real, don't we, Shooshan?
I don't recall we have it in data, but maybe we do. I should look it up.
I think
Either
we
way, we can
do.
ask them, definitely.
I mean, I looked at it and I believe I looked at it and it was really high.
I see. So
Which-
it's not even.
Well, which may mean that high GPA people responded to the questionnaire.
The
Or that
overachievers,
students-
procrastinators.
Yeah, or students overestimated their GPA. But as I recall, there is a question about that. So we can look into that. There's a ton of data, we've just barely started looking at it.
The survey consisted of over 70 questions that were asked. So it's a substantial, long survey, which really delves into the the changing opportunities for students. And as Janet points out, we haven't had a chance to fully work with Wayne State data, but we also haven't even had a chance to also delve into the national data and combine the Wayne State with the national data in order to do anything beyond Wayne State, which is going to be the next step as well. Mike Belzer asks, obviously we have a bias, but I would like to see their GPA as a dependent variable. I want to know what predicts that. Aha. In fact, that might actually be a really good way of figuring out whether we have a bias in our sample as well, whether we're skewed towards towards the precrastinators in our data in the survey response.
And any other questions?
The other question for me is, given your findings and the involvement of the upper administration in facilitating the survey, and I'm assuming that the provost and the president and the deans generally know about the results.
Absolutely.
What do you predict will be the impact of this study on university policies, behaviors, emphases, and so on?
Well, I don't know for sure, but the idea that they want to continue P and N grades takes a lot of stress off of students. And so they've extended that policy through this semester. The Counseling and Psychological Services has put together a whole slew of workshops and therapeutic opportunities for students. I run a learning community, and we've been absolutely focused on our students' well-being. So we've gone, beyond what we might have done in previous semesters to check in with kids that we haven't heard from, who've missed 2 classes in a row because the course is synchronous. To follow up on those who aren't doing their quizzes to find out if they're all right. As I said, I've written more care reports than I can even count. And I'm really good friends with Nicolina in the Dean of Students office, who's terribly responsive. And they've eliminated a lot of the waiting lists for help. So I think those things suggest to me that they're really paying attention. And we did share this survey widely with the administration.
I think another thing that happens, Walter, is that if they look at what's going on now, and I don't know whether they're keeping a copy of this in their pocket or anything, that they can say, wow, we had this same problem in the winter and it hasn't gone away. And I think that most of us recognize that in March and April, everybody was on steroids trying to finish the winter term. And then you get, all right, now we had time to think about some stuff over spring, summer. You had spring, summer classes as well. All right, now we're into the fall. What's the stuff that's still going on, and what hasn't changed? And the administrators are administrators, and as many of us have been, but it would seem to me that to a certain extent it would provide. I think what we provided was an extraordinary baseline for whatever they've been wanting to do.
Yes, Mike, we can weight the data for educational policy to see what predicts outcomes.
Well, I think we're running on time. This is an hour seminar, right?
Yes.
We would be glad to stay on for as long as anybody wants to ask us a few more questions. for other people, I'm stealing your thunder, Walter. But I've done that before. But we'd certainly be glad to answer further questions and to interact with people either on this Zoom or at some other time.
But thank you so much. I know that this survey has stimulated a lot of questions, and the material could be used for other things. I mean, I looked at the first one of the first slides you showed is that students are less concerned about things like computers and so on, and far more concerned about their lack of fellowship with their fellow students and with faculty. And that sort of raises a question about whether or not the survey was sensitive to sort of levels of, I mean, whether students were freshmen or sophomores or so on, because you might get different kinds of emphases and different kinds of needs the higher up you go, and rather graduate students were more likely to do that. So there's a lot of sociological, social psychological studies that can emerge from this data. But anyway, yes, go ahead, Janet.
No, I was, there's so much we can do. And, you know, we thank you all for coming and for your useful questions and your comments. We're very appreciative of that.
And just to reflect on the comment that Walter made, one of the interesting factors which caught me off guard in the survey is the proportion of first-generation students at Wayne State. And first-generation students are not only going to be in a position where they feel uncomfortable seeking support and help from faculty and from services in a normal situation, but in this situation, they're more likely to feel cut off because they don't know what are the avenues, the ways, and the methods for participating when participation is not kind of in this physical classroom sense. So I think that Wayne State has a particularly difficult task ahead of it because of the high rate of first-generation students or students whose parents were first-generation as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And Kennedy has something to say before we go.
Yes, first, it's been a pleasure working with you three. And I think this was a very well-crafted presentation, but a well-crafted survey throughout it all. And being able to bring all of these individuals together from different departments, like we say, like this is what the Humanity Center is about. And you guys really facilitated some meaningful discussion. And I'm excited. I hope there's a second wave and that we can have you guys back on. But on behalf of the Humanity Center, we just thank you all for coming and hosting this talk. And as a token, a small token of our gratitude, we do have some gifts for all three of you. We wish we could give these to you in person. It's a journal and a mask with
a mask. I've been looking for a mask. I don't have a cloth mask, and I've been wanting something that would be meaningful to wear. I'm so happy.
Yeah. So we do have this for all three of you, and we will be reaching out to you via email to safely get these masks to you towards the end of the semester. But thank you again, and this was a really great presentation with a great turnout as well. So
thanks everybody for coming.
Yes, thank our audience
indeed,
too. Such a great turnout. This is recorded, so if you ever want to go back and look at the presentation or the slides, it will be on our website, the Humanity Center website, towards the end of the week. So thank you. Thank you all. And if there is anything else you want to say, Dr. Edwards?
No, but thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. And you all
thank you,
be
Kennedy,
safe.
very much as well.
Stay safe, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.